for all the cities in the country, or most of the cities in the country. There are like 350 cities for like 100 maps. And each of them uses several indicators, model, and data for different sites to create something like what you see there. So like interactive map that you can kind of scalate, that you can kind of see what's the level of threat or hazard or exposure or sensitivity or resilience, and that computes to risk. To do that, we did that through a project that was funded by the GIZ of Germany, the European Union, and coordinated in Chile by the Ministry of Environment, together with different universities of the country that we work together to create that. And it's currently it has become the main source of information for all risk plans. It actually was included in the law, so that if everybody wants to do a plan, they have to do this. And if they create new information, they actually have to input that into the system, so that the system is ever growing. Now, the system itself is a nice tool, but we created also ways to make it more manageable and more accessible, because one thing that we found is that when you are a decision maker at a municipality level, you don't really want to see all the maps of all the country, because it just gets confusing for you. You want to see what happens in your city across different kinds of risk at the same time. Next slide, please. So for that, we basically took all the information that was contained here in the next slide, and all the information that was contained here, we put that into another navigator, which will be shown promptly, and which basically allows you to see all this data and information for each city that you defined, and across different kinds of risk, by giving you the specific information, all the indicators that are contained into each risk, because most of the risk maps are made of different indicators at the same time. Yeah, that one. So you can kind of explore all the different indicators. You can download it interactively. You can download the whole database and use it for other purposes, because it's all free and public data which can be accessible. And now we are working with the Ministry of Environment so that this can be integrated, because the idea is that they want to have the idea is to get to one system, in which is one stop point in which you can get all the information with different kind of visualization depending on what you're trying to do. Next slide, please. Then to complete that, one thing was missing, because the original methodology that was used was not considering resilience as one of the dimension. When it was made, the IPCC fifth report was still out, fifth cycle, and the fifth cycle was using the concept of resilience, but just barely, was not fully integrated, differently from what's happening now in the sixth cycle. But we started in Chile working on that and how to integrate resilience into risk analysis and into all the other dimensions. And we created a conceptual framework with that, with different dimensions and different kinds of indicators. And then we brought that down to using different secondary data sources with a total of 43 indicators across 9 dimensions. And with that, we could create resilience maps for all the country, for all the municipalities of the country, which are focused on urban resilience and were constructed based on big data analysis of 7,500 research papers to identify which were like the key kinds of variables that were needed to be measured to compute resilience. Next slide, please. All this also was created into a navigator that you can explore. You can see which kind of dimension is more important in each stage, what kind of dimension is happening, what's the level that it is in your city, in other city. And the idea is that this also is being integrated into the other analysis I showed before, so that when you are assessing risk, you are able to understand in each municipality what are the key factors that are gaps, so that you can focus on them to prioritize the kind of actions that you want to have. Next slide. And the final platform I will show to you is called Aura. This is a platform specifically targeting extreme heat. We will have later a presentation exactly on that, so it was connected with that. This platform, next slide please, was made based on a combination of different kinds of data and models. So it includes downscaled climate models, includes a modeling of the city urban heat islands based on a series of data taken from different meteorological stations, plus a series of sensors that were deployed across the city, and plus other indicators connected with the satellite images, with planning, urban planning. And with that, it basically creates an estimation of what is the level of heat stress that is suffered in different places under different scenarios. And on top of that, what it does make is that it allows you to make scenarios of what would happen if you, for instance, would change a part of the city, the urban cover one part of the city, how the urban heat, extreme heat effect would change under different climate scenarios and under different building scenarios. So that has been used, next slide, on one specific city within the city of Santiago, which is a big metropolitan area, and now it's in the work of being scaled through this year and the next for the whole metropolitan region of Santiago, and then of course from there to be scaled to um, the whole totality of the country when possible. Next slide. And that was that. We have, of course, many other platforms. There is one more that I think would be very relevant for this panel, but I cannot spoiler it because after this panel we have another one in which I present that. So if you want to know about that, which is the risk and adaptation platform, just stay tuned in the next session after this. For now, I will pass it back to Laura. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, yeah. I'm following here. So to go on with the session, I'd like now to call the members of the rest of the panel because now we're going to have a panel on discussion. In this second block of the session, we're going to show and see some experiences of different kinds of network and non-state actors collaboration that have been happening across the world, specifically to try and advance into accelerating and making more robust climate action to build resilience in city and coastal communities. So for that, I will first of all call here Marcia Toledo. Marcia is the Director of Adaptation and Resilience at the Climate Champions team. Thank you very much, Marcia. I will also call Sherry Stenhouse. She is the Finance Innovation Director within the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. And Owen Go, Deputy Director of the Stream Heat Initiative at the Climate Resilience Center of the Atlantic Council, which represents both of them represent key partners of the Race to Resilience campaign, and Marcia will give us context on that, first of all, on the campaign, on what we do, what happens. So Marcia, back to you, the microphone. Thanks.
Thank you very much. If the presentation can be put, that would be great. First of all, very good to see every one of you and to share a little bit more about the experience of the high-level climate champions working with non-state actors. And very briefly, before going on to the details, what are the UN high-level climate champions? I think that's a very typical question, so I'm very happy to explain that first. The parties gave the mandate to the UN high-level climate champions to help bridge the work of the non-state actors with the work of the governments. So you know very well, we are in the UNFCCC processes annually, and this is very much led by national governments making decisions that are critical for global opportunities to advance climate action. But the non-state actors like subnational governments, cities, regions, the private sector, including SMEs, businesses, the finance sector, and civil society organizations organized through research think tanks, through local community action, through coalitions, are already very strong advancing different opportunities on climate action. So this is a campaign that was launched in 2021, and perhaps we can start already with the next slide. Thank you. Which is the Race to Resilience, was launched in 2021, specifically with the opportunity to respond to a context that we know very well. Solutions exist, knowledge locally exists, capacity exists, and there's of course opportunity to strengthen those. But there has been a context of many different solutions, many different opportunities, and as well an interpretation of adaptation is local, but it's very difficult to grasp it and how to integrate it and mainstream it and articulate it. So the context at that time and the motivation of launching the campaign was we have a piecemeal approach of all of those solutions, and there's no clarity what to do, where to do, how. The previous panels on the previous presentation showed very clearly you have to be contextually based, you have to encourage locally led opportunities, you have to foster the connection of science, the actions, but also influencing policies and finance so that these are scalable. So the Race to Resilience partnered with CR2 to bring together how can we better aggregate the work of all of these different non-state actors and identify the opportunity to connect those actions that are happening on the ground with the impact on people. And if we clearly bring that collective ambition, collective goal, we can as well have an opportunity to not only aggregate but also bring together those lessons learned and inform future opportunities that can be critical, especially in the context that we are now, on the global goal and adaptation, on the type of actions, but also on bringing people at the center of climate action. And throughout that process, we've partnered with multiple actors, including several that are here today with us. So we have right now 41 partners. It's a little bit of a description there. And there is a journey that the campaign has taken in that process of helping us to understand, yes, there are different thematic actions that are critical and very important contextually based. But at the end of the day, we will be very much enhancing the resilience of people. For that, it's critical to enhance the resilience of systems. So we're working par in par with how that can happen, what are the metrics framework, and how we're tracking progress. So the campaign in that sense and the contribution of the science capacity of CR2 and other partners are especially in guiding us to make sure that we can bring this to a robust level, so that we can actually track the progress, showcase the evidence, and as well keep informing not only locally relevant context, but also specifically, hopefully, enhance the opportunities that are globally relevant. And so in that process of tracking, let's say, exploring how we can better track the increasing the resilience of people, the metrics framework developed has also, maybe we can go to the next slide, evolved, which is, we have like, this is the third year of the campaign. And so we have 41 partners, and we have a commitment of 4 billion people by 2030 to increase resilience. The collective commitment of the partners are reaching a pledge of 3.6 billion. The action plans of the partners are already identifying that 2 billion people could be covered. There is a finance mobilization attached. There is a nature as well, integration in different types of solutions that are relevant. This is a geographic spread of 164 countries, multiple number of regions and cities, and as well evidence, solution stories of the leadership of these actors. But what is more important, if we go to the next slide, is that we've learned together with the partners how to track that progress, what it means for the partner, what capacity exists at the level of the actors. And the relevance is, of course, those actions are happening in a specific context, as we heard before, in a specific system. So we parallel brought together the Sharm Adaptation Agenda 2 years later to give the space to those type of, let's say, relevant contextual solutions. We're going back. We need to go back. and the specific topic of today, that is very much focused on oceans and coastal, is a type of system where we have one more, where we have several different actors, and we're working very closely with the Marquez Partnership. And so we have partners that are contributing with nature-based solutions, with, for example, on coral restoration of mangroves, or investments on other types of coastal and cities planning and solutions that are very relevant for integrating what are those contextually based type of solutions that are needed. And while we are also gathering that information, it was evident that not everyone, not every solution can immediately translate to the impact of people, but there are signals of change. There are also other types of attributes that are critical to track. Our finance mobilized, our policy informed, our technology, knowledge, access to climate risk information improve or systematize. So this is an evolution as well that we've taken into the race to resilience. If we can go to the next slide, which mostly help us elevate. Yes, we are collectively tracking not only the pledges of the non-state actors, but also the improvements and the capacity that can help us understand the number of people increasing resilience, but also what are those attributes? What is the gender lens? What is the locally led adaptation that actually informs those? Are their capacity improved? Are their decision-making co-creation, etc.? And bringing this all together help us understand where are the areas where we need to work more, or where are the success stories that we can actually aggregate. Collectively aggregation is critical for us, because the tension that we see most of the times is very isolated, or very so localized solutions that it's harder to make a global context, or harder to tell a compelling aggregated story. So the campaign is actually very much recognizing the need and the unique opportunity to advance those global contexts, those local solutions, and elevate the voices of the communities benefiting, or the actors that are working on the ground, but at the same time helpful in aggregating and identifying what are the main barriers for accessing data, or for bringing more, let's say, co-creation on those opportunities. No, so we believe at the level of the campaign and the champions, we can contribute because of the science, the tracking, the leadership stories, to also identify what are the signals of change that can help us better put forward the policies, the finance, the partnerships that are being developed, or the type of tools and climate risk information, but especially as well how communities are being empowered. We do recognize there are many challenges, especially I would say on the capacity of the type of actors to really not only implement the project, but also track the progress. And the multiple, maybe the last slide is the one that is explicitly saying key points that we identify still that we believe the campaign can help catalyze this type of solutions. There is a learning curve. We are not starting from scratch. Those solutions exist for many decades, but it's about making them evident and bringing to how this can inform actually policy processes, but as well driving the convergence that yes, we do need these resilient systems, but these resilient systems critical to as well reflect how this is increasing the resilience of people, and how there is a cross-cutting and aggregated between different systems. We cannot isolate nature from human settlements. We cannot isolate nature from water systems or land use systems. So critical in that sense, this interactions between systems. As well, methods. While there are many methods to calculate the impact of those actions, they are not yet a convergence and the clarity of which methods to follow, so that we can better track the impact in people. So this is also a specific areas where become evident, especially in a context where we want to better contribute and inform a global goal and adaptation that can actually, let's say, elevate those success methodologies that can help better drive action, but as well represent the reality. And the final is the signals of change that I believe is an enormous contribution to reflect that additional ways of tracking progress on a more like process-oriented or enabling conditions-oriented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcia, to explain to us the way in which the race to resilience and the work of the champions is helping to catalyze the work of multi-state actors, and now to hear more, to understand how this is happening in practice in the different places. I would like to give the word to some of the people that are working on that. So, Jenny, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me as part of this panel this afternoon. I'm from the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. We are an organization, a non-profit, non-state actor within the Caribbean region, representing a coalition of 29 countries across the Caribbean and Central and South America. Our implementation focus, though, is primarily on the Caribbean. So certainly our target market and those countries and partners that we support are predominantly living in coastal, and I'll say countries rather than cities. Many of our countries are very, very small, and similar to what we experience in coastal cities or even larger countries, a lot of the population lives around the coast because the interiors of the countries are uninhabitable. So certainly there is an intersection between coastal as well as urban settings in many of our countries, and geographically we live in the belt where we are predominantly impacted by climate change, in addition to the other inherent issues and systemic issues that plague our countries. So from that perspective, certainly our participation in this um, discussion is critical and crucial. And the solutions that we work with are designed to really help catalyze change and transform our countries to become more resilient and ultimately to become leaders in climate change and in the building and creation of climate solutions for the world. So we work across four core pillars. We work on renewable energy targets. We work on the 30 by 30 agenda, which is heavily adaptation based. We also work on the building of physical and economic resilience through the creation of green jobs. And then we have a climate smart map, which I will go into a little bit later, but very similar to the solution that Marco presented. So for us today, we've heard a lot about the threats. We've heard a lot about um, measurement, understanding the risk, um, and we've heard about some solutions. But how do we get to the stage where we can implement those solutions? The next piece of the puzzle really is the financing. Certainly for us, in working across those four pillars, what we aim to do with our partners is to bring finance to the table. We are not a traditional accelerator in incubating projects per se, but we act as a collaborator and a convener across the region, both for mobilization of capital as well as the delivery of supply and solutions that may be relevant to the Caribbean region and that can be implemented in a way that is fit for purpose within the Caribbean region. We also are very much focused on innovation and the development of homegrown solutions, but certainly recognizing that because of the urgency of the situation, there is the need for both regional partnership as well as international partnership, both in finance as well as supply. And where there are solutions that work, there certainly is not a need to reinvent the wheel. So we are a very strong identifier of partners and a connector within the region to help both countries as well as the private sector to be able to reach its climate ambitions. So let me just, from our perspective, kind of define the climate finance gap. Climate Policy Initiative annually does a state of climate finance study. And their study for 2023 indicated that total climate finance, despite the global crises, had increased significantly from 2018 to 1.46 trillion in 2022. And it was estimated that it would exceed 1.5 trillion when the review for 2023 was completed. That's a 20% cumulative annual growth rate from 2018 to 2022. Adaptation finance as a proportion of that total started at 35 billion in 2018 and reached 76 billion in 2022. So out of 1.5 trillion, adaptation finance was 76 billion. The estimated need for developing states is 212 billion annually. CPI estimates it to be between 212 and 239 billion for the next 5 years, but the United Nations Environmental Program has a way more aggressive forecast, a little bit broader, 150 billion to 300 billion per year to 2030. So, in short, adaptation finance flows need to triple over the next 5 years to even begin to meet the needs of developing states. Now, we also know that there is certainly an underestimation of adaptation finance flows because there are difficulties with measuring it. It's primarily driven by public spending, and there's not always the capacity or the capability within governments to accurately measure adaptation flows. We also know that there are a lot of mitigation and adaptation projects with co-benefits, where the adaptation portion may not necessarily be fully measured. So even though there may be some variability in those numbers, there still is a significant gap in what is needed for adaptation that we need to bridge. So how do we get there? Now, those numbers are those are global numbers. Now, within the Caribbean, we exist in what we as the accelerator like to call a data desert. It is almost impossible to get these numbers for the Caribbean. As an organization, I mentioned our Climate Smart Map. It is a digital tool that we have developed that aggregates data for the Caribbean region that allows you to track progress towards climate action for the countries within our coalition. So it covers a broad range of information from the existence of adaptation plans, NDCs, vulnerabilities, the quantified loss due to climate events for specific countries on the map, but it also has a significant portion of economic data that will allow a potential investor to, perhaps having seen losses or seen the adaptation plan for a particular country, to be able then to go in and assess if a particular country is somewhere they may want to operate. So we have that map as a core part of our work to help with the mobilization of capital and the identification of where there's significant opportunities within the Caribbean region to mobilize finance as well as to implement solutions towards climate action generally and specifically for this purpose for climate adaptation. So that is one of our core pieces of work that we will continue to build out to be able to support our partners for climate action across the region. It is available on our website. It is open. The source of the information is primarily publicly available information and information that has been voluntarily provided to us by the owners of the data, so that we are as up to date and as accurate as the owners of the data were. But we will continue to populate that map in a way that allows us to enable decision making for climate action for the Caribbean region. Now, in terms of mobilizing finance for our region, there is an economic opportunity for adaptation finance. While we recognize that it generally is seen as the purview of governments, there are solutions that can be commercialized. There are activities that the private sector can undertake. So how do we move the needle so that we are incentivizing the private sector as well as governments to make the investments that are required? Research conducted by Standard Chartered, which was published in their Adaptation Economy Report, found that for every $1 spent on adaptation in this decade, an economic benefit of US $12 could be generated, which highlights the significant long-term payoffs that can be generated and the losses that can be avoided by current investment in adaptation. So we need to create the enabling environment that encourages both governments and private sector to make the investments that are needed. There is a business case. It needs to be refined and presented both to government and to private institutions to help mobilize capital. And we need this done both on the side of the market, through the commercialization of some of these solutions that address adaptation where it is relevant. And we certainly recognize that not all of them can be commercialized. Some things will remain the purview of government, but certainly there are solutions that assist with adaptation and vulnerability that can become commercial. And we would want them to be developed as such so that the private sector appetite is there for funding those solutions. We'd also want to see the standardization and harmonization of measurement and reporting around adaptation, finance flows, as well as around the outcomes of adaptation. That includes data, disclosure, metrics, and alignment of strategies. Part of our work on the finance side has afforded us the opportunity to be aligned with GFANS as part of the Latin American Caribbean chapter, where we are a member of the advisory board. We had previously been operating a financial advisory committee, which is a grouping of leaders from financial institutions within the Caribbean region who are committed to supporting climate action and achieving net zero. And we have recently been given permission to move forward with the development of a Caribbean chapter for GFANS. Um, we spoke a bit today about fit for purpose and homegrown solutions. Certainly, GFANS as a global organization with chapters developing for specific regions across the world certainly has given us the opportunity as well to have a chapter that addresses the specific needs of financial institutions within the Caribbean region with a view to supporting transition planning, integrating risk assessment, as well as understanding the business case for financing climate, integrating that into their own portfolios. And we also recognize that that needs to be done on the side of regulation as well, implementing climate risk assessments into regulatory plans so that we further strengthen and incentivize the case for climate investment and for the need to reach net zero. So against that backdrop, some of the tools that we would want to see and some of the innovations that we would want to see coming into our market to support adaptation finance certainly include these three things at a high level. The adoption of blended finance approaches to funding adaptation solutions. So we certainly know that there's a strong case for the blending of concessional finance with private sector as well as with philanthropy to be able to mobilize capital, lowering the cost of capital, de-risking projects, and allowing certainly actors in the financial sector to play the role that they are best equipped and best specialized to play. Moving beyond green finance into impact-based and measurement-based finance. So we have seen the advent of green bonds, climate bonds, catastrophe bonds within our market, but we certainly want to see a move in the direction of impact-based and measurement-based financing that allows you to now layer on certain incentives for the achievement of certain outcomes that also allow for the lowering of finance rates and the provision of some reward once the commitments that have been made are actually achieved. And I think there is a strong incentive and again business case for moving in that direction. Certainly, time, we know that there's a need for urgency. We certainly know as well for governments, priorities may change, and we want to avoid, because of all the taxonomies and we've seen all the scandals that have occurred in the private sector, we do not want to move that type of behavior into government either. So I think there is an opportunity for strengthening of the financial instruments that we see coming in to support adaptation. And then finally, I'll speak a little bit about parametric and index insurance. Within the Caribbean, we actually have an excellent example of this through the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, which is now up and running, supported through our CARICOM regional bodies. And it actually has, because of the vulnerabilities that we face, has actually been put into action quite frequently since it has come on stream for natural disasters as well as for the frequent events that we have experienced within the Caribbean region. So we are seeing within our region as well, even at the level of government, some innovation towards climate action and adaptation. So finally, what I'll say is we do have the opportunity as well to continue to refine traditional methods of financing, project preparation facilities, technical assistance, development grants, and ensuring that they're channeled specifically towards adaptation that will help us address the issues of coastal and vulnerable communities. I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Please an applause. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it was very interesting to understand also how the connection between data and showing that data and the finance and innovation in both things and decision making all need to be brought together, and how the first that you're doing, particularly in a region which has been lacking pretty much in all of that, is really, really commendable. So thank you very much for that. Now, Owen, I would like to hear from you on the experience that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So a request to the audience first. I think we're an hour and a half in, and I just want to invite everyone to stand up if you're able and just stretch, because we've been sitting for a while, and I know we've been walking a lot, but also sitting a lot. So feel free to stretch and take a second before sitting back down. So my name's Owen Gao. I'm with the Atlantic Council. I'm the Deputy Director for Extreme Heat Initiatives there, but that's not the hat that I'm wearing today. If you could put up the slides as well. I'm here representing the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance, and I think that begs the question of why am I talking about extreme heat at a panel focused on coastal cities? And the reality is that a lot of the cities taking part in this alliance, which I'll share more about, are coastal cities. They face sea level rise, they face coastal flooding, but they also face extreme heat, and it's a major issue for many of them, which they've prioritized. Next slide, please. So the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance is a Race to Resilience member, I think from the inception of the Race to Resilience, and proudly so, and has been kind of participating through the Resilience Hub and through other means. So that's the hat that I'm wearing today, as both as an ERA representative, as a Race to Resilience member. So this is a bit about the Atlantic Council and what we do. I'm representing the heat pillar. Do you mind moving to the next slide? Oh, one back. And these are some of the members of ERA. So you see CRIF, which was mentioned previously, a number of cities, including Freetown, Sierra Leone, Melbourne, Australia, Dhaka North, Bangladesh. So the names that you're hearing are coastal cities that are facing the challenges that have been discussed, but also extreme heat. But also community organizations, kind of public health specialists, insurance organizations. So these organizations came together into the Extreme Heat Resilience Alliance because they shared a common interest in addressing heat's impact to the most vulnerable. So they essentially said heat is not what we focus on solely, but heat is something that we are seeing as an issue in our work. I'm actually going to sit back down. Next slide, please. So extreme heat, it's a cross-cutting issue. It impacts every part of society, children and infants, the elderly, outdoor laborers, the chronically ill, pregnant people, but also every aspect of life. So it has economic impacts, biodiversity impacts, agriculture, and food security. And these are all issues that coastal cities are dealing with as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see from this map, I want to point out two things. First, every title, city name that you see with a blue line underneath it is one that has appointed a position called a Chief Heat Officer. And these are all ERA members, but these are specific governance roles focused on extreme heat as an individual hazard. And why just heat? Why not, a chief water officer, a chief flooding officer, a chief heat officer? The reason for heat is because it is often fragmented across a number of different government agencies. It's fragmented across the Department of Transportation, the Department of Health, fire and emergency response. And so the idea was to bring this all under the purview of a single government official who could coordinate and be the face of that public response to heat. Next slide, please. The text here might be very difficult to read unless you look at the screen closest to you, but I just want to make the case here. This is a report that we put out a few years ago focused on the impacts of heat to a number of cities, and you'll see that a number of these are coastal cities, the majority, and this is just the loss in labor productivity, quantified in labor productivity. This doesn't count impacts to infrastructure. This doesn't count the impacts to long-term impacts on society when people learn less in school because of the heat. But you'll see numbers like $10 billion lost in Miami, $100 million lost in Santiago in 1 year in 2020, and by 2050 that number is going to increase. So this is clearly an issue that already has a cost, not just a public health impact. And so this is the case that we're trying to make through the Alliance, is to bring these actors together and work collectively. As Aditya was saying, this needs to be something that involves community organizations as well as a multi-sector response. Next slide, please. Because I want to keep my remarks relatively short, I just want to leave you with one thing, a framework to think about heat action in a simplified way. And it's something that the chief heat officer within UN Habitat and a colleague of mine, Lenio Miravilli, uses And she uses the framework awareness, preparedness, and redesign. And the idea is that these are the three main components when we think about what we can do about heat. Do people know that heat is an issue, first of all? Do they know what to do when a heat wave is coming? And do they have early warnings in place to deliver that information to them? Preparedness. So do people have, in schools, a heat response plan to make sure that children have a way to get home safely or to get to a cooling center? And finally, redesign. Those first two sections are great, but in the end, our cities are not, in many cases, built for purpose, fit for purpose at this point with the types of heat waves that we're seeing. So how do we need to redesign neighborhoods and urban environments to be more appropriate for the heat of today? Next slide, please. So these last two slides are just some resources that the or the Climate Resilience Center where I work and ERA have put out. I think I'll end here, but just want to leave you with that final note. Extreme heat is impacting all cities, but coastal cities are a major site for this. So I would encourage all of you, as you think about your work in coastal cities, to think about when people are facing sea level rise, are they also facing impacts in terms of utility bills from the heat and other impacts along those lines? So I'll leave it there and just say thank you for having me, and I'll pass it back.
Very much also for the presentation and how you show how and where heat happens. The truth is probably not even as are really aware of that in some way, even as I work on that. So very much useful to put that in that way. Maybe what I'd like to do now in these last moments is to see to bring everybody back, all the people that are here. The idea is that we can try and maybe have a couple of conversation or question about everything that may happen. So maybe I would like first to see if anybody in the audience has any questions from here. Please.
So good afternoon. I am actually a Filipina teacher, high school teacher for science. I'm a science high school teacher, and the presentation is exactly what we experienced during the summer. We had 40 degrees Celsius of heat wave that have caused us to lose class time, and we had to suspend classes, and the electric fans were there. There were cooling systems, mechanisms, but it wasn't enough. People, the kids were getting sick. There were already blackouts that happened because it was too hot. So there was not enough energy to go around. And so my question is, for those areas, this is the city already, but of course the more the coastal areas that you're talking about, they even have more increased temperatures. What could be the most affordable solution? Because we're not exactly a rich country, right? We have fisher folks and farmers as the majority, and they earn about, in US dollars, around 10 US dollars a day for a family of 5. How would they be able to afford all these insulations and all of those things that because for our school we were able to have our air conditioning units, but for the far-flung areas, I don't think they would have that means. Not even the classroom to support them. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was in Manila in the spring, and I want to say in February or March, and it was already hot. And then I know that it became even hotter over the course of the summer. So the question about affordable solutions for extreme heat, I think often when people talk about extreme heat and solutions, especially relating to urban nature, we talk about trees. And the reality is that trees, the planting of them and the maintenance of them are very expensive often. And if you plant the wrong type of tree, then it'll die and so on. And so what we've seen a lot for example, in India, in the kind of more affordable solutions, especially in informal settlements, relate to shade and strategic application of shade. So what kinds of tarps can you use in markets to cover people while they work? What kinds of cool paints? Not just, there are very high-tech reflective paints, but there's also much, much lower cost solutions that use reflective, what's the word, tile integrated into roofs to increase the albedo and decrease the indoor temperatures. So what kinds of things like that are possible in the case of, in the very specific case of fisher folks or people working in the fishing industry? I think there's some interesting work taking place. I want to say this is in Madagascar, so a very different context, but trying to protect the earnings of the fishing industry by having cool shelters for the produce or the fish that they bring in, because the reality is that in high heat, that food will spoil. So they're using a combination, I think, of cool paints and AC to protect those goods. So I would just say it is an issue that a lot of solutions to heat are very unaffordable, but there are some emerging solutions we see, especially India has been at the vanguard of that as well. So, and there's many that I'm sure that I don't know about. But I want to see, are there any other examples, Marcia or others, that you would like to share?
Yes, thank you. Not an example of a actual solution, but certainly a financial example. Just extending on my previous comments to say that we're seeing certainly the creation of blended finance instruments that are designed specifically to address specific sectoral adaptation solutions. And I do recall recently, as part of one of CPI's technical assistance programs, assessing a finance facility for specifically for cooling solutions. So it's a fund that will be available to enable persons in a specific location to be able to access funding for cooling solutions within their countries. So we are seeing on the finance side the evolution of solutions that provide resources to help people where they may not immediately have the funds available to be able to access solutions, and to assist market players as well to be able to bring those solutions into marketplaces, certainly recognizing the specific challenges that persons in those territories or countries face in terms of level of earnings, what the specific needs are in that country, and what that specific market needs to address the heat stress that it is facing.
Thank you very much. Very good and interesting points. Anybody else has any questions? Please. You can please introduce yourself.
Yes, sure. Frances Clone. I work at the Center for American Progress in Washington. I was wondering, so I'm a Miami-Dade homeowner, and I was wondering, we tried to make the case in Miami-Dade for a local level ordinance to protect workers. Would give them a break when they're working in extreme heat, every 2 hours for 10 minutes for a water break. This would have to be implemented by employers, right? They would have to allow them the break. It was one way in which we could provide some relief, and it would be ordained at the county level. That ordinance failed in the county because of a high level of investment lobbying against it from the employers and developers. I'm wondering if worker health, well-being is not it's not something that really moves people to make the right decision. Are there other things like learning hours that are lost? What other things are groups documenting in terms of impacts of extreme heat that might be things that maybe if parents go to school board meetings and advocate for changes and adaptation solutions to extreme heat, maybe that goes farther than maybe low-wage workers that not a lot of people seem to care about, at least in our county?
It's a particularly hard question right after the election, because not only do we have
You're telling me.
Yeah. Because not only in Florida is there Governor DeSantis's kind of opposition to any kind of regulation, but also now the OSHA heat standard. I'm getting very specific to the U.S., but the OSHA heat standard is now probably going to get on the chopping block from the Trump administration. And so I would say there, speaking first specifically about workers, there are emerging but kind of not enough advanced efforts to estimate the losses due to extreme heat by sector and by industry. I would say that that's actually, there could be a lot more work done there from my point of view. There's some interesting work done by La Isla Network and Jason Glazer there to estimate the physiological strain of heat to construction workers for Turner Construction. And I think, I want to say that's in Nevada, but it should be done elsewhere as well. I think it has to be a business case. It's clearly not working as a health case to employers. And so if the regulation's not there, there has to be some kind of case made. These are the number of dollars you're losing. We tried to do this with this labor productivity report, but that was at the state level, and so, or at the county level, so it's not down to a specific employer. I think it's going to come down to going to X construction company and saying, we think you're losing X amount of money. And I'm not sure what else can spur that other than a top-down regulation, which we aren't going to see in Florida in the near future. So I'm sorry to sound very pessimistic on that front, but but that's where research money is needed to look into that. So.
Thank you. I do also have maybe one last question because we are really much approaching the end of the time that we have allocated. I think it has been very interesting, and maybe going back to all that we learned today, we did follow the idea that the cities are really one of the territories that are at the forefront of many different kinds of hazards and of risks. But exactly because it's so many different ones, and the cities are not really one system, but it's more like a combination of different systems, which has different actors, different sectors, different kind of public administration, of private actors involved. So for all those kinds of reasons, finding solution requires always like these overall systemic approach. Even when you only talk about heat, to make an example, you need to integrate different kinds of things. And when you talk about finance, it also means the same. Like we do need some finance, but we need to prove what are the solutions that are needed, where are needed, what may work, and what is the best thing, because if resources are insufficient, that you have to choose. How do you choose which one to do? So it very much becomes a problem of decision making in all ways, and this problem of decision making becomes a problem of prioritization, and this problem of prioritization becomes a problem of defining what is best and how do I define what is the potential and what is the progress and what may work. So maybe just to invite you all to a final reflection on that, like what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what should be done to make that comparable, accessible evidence on what may work, what should be done, what should be the priority for coastal cities, and to make them more resilient. And maybe I will invite you to, if you want to make a comment on that.
I think certainly as a closing comment, we've heard, all of the comments today, certainly indicating, as I said, that the research has been done. We're measuring impacts. There are solutions available. Those solutions require funding. We are seeing some innovation emerging that can support mobilizing finance that is required for those solutions that we've seen. But what we have to continue to do, as was underscored very early on in our presentations, is to ensure that the solutions that we implement in each place work for that particular place. We can't, as was said, use the cookie cutter approach, but continue to create specific changes and tweaks and innovations relevant to each country to ensure that the solutions that are implemented really work for them in reducing the hazards and the vulnerabilities of those specific cities.
Yeah, from my side, it's mostly to recognize that in a similar manner, all of those actions and efforts that are already bottom-up being advanced by different type of actors across the cities that are being impacted from different types of risks. If we make it very specific, the opportunities. It will allow as well to better target the funding that is needed and the role of the private sector specifically. We do have major needs of clarity in regards of, let's say, channeling specific adaptation public finance. But if we want to bring it to scale, we do need to continue bringing the private sector that is definitely not on zero, but there is potential to better articulate the role of the private sector as well across several insurance products that have been already advanced by multiple actors, included by ERA and others. Uh, but not only in regards of risks transfer, but in regards as well of at every stages, a construction or at different types of services, we need to be more specific to really allow that those specific solutions, specific contexts can have clear channeling of finance, that multiple sources can really get to the point of compensation or temporary allocation or reallocation. We need to be very creative, otherwise the narrative continues to be very broad, very general, and also again piecemeal. That there are many solutions and no concrete points to how we connect this need with this opportunity. So my encourage is, let's make sure we move away from the generalization and we be as specific as possible so that those funding finance opportunities and the role of multiple actors can actually take more place. Thanks.
That was really well said. I'm worried about following up on that. I think that point on piecemeal, though, is really important. It's something that we're trying to address through this heat alliance. Heat is a very, it's been hot for a long time, but through this alliance we want to move beyond pilots on extreme heat. We want to move beyond one-off, one-location pilots for heat adaptation and try to figure out how do you look across multiple country contexts, very locally led projects, but look at investment that can take place on a larger scale. So that's something we're trying to grapple with, is that issue of a lot of piecemeal efforts and how to connect larger investment beyond the pilot stage. So I'll leave it there and say that's something we're still working on.
Very much, everybody. And Cecilia, I don't know if you want to, since you made opening remarks, it would be nice if you went further.
Thank you. The same for me. So I think we need more collaboration. We need to share solutions. And regarding the finance, we need also to prove the efficiency of the solutions to be able to invite the funders and all private sector to finance these solutions. So it's really important to share best practices.
Thank you very much. And I would like maybe a big applause to thank everybody of the panelists, and thank you very much everybody for being here. With that, we do close the panel, and we thank you very much for being here, and we hope you have a very, very good continuation of all the work and travel that we'll be having here at COP. Thank you.
I don't know what is happening because we can hear everything from his phone, the WhatsApps,
Excuse me. Yeah, I was.
Okay, this is Zoom, this is a presentation, and video.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but also I need the USB stick because I cannot transfer to Zoom file.